Midway through my preparations for this sermon yesterday, I got interrupted by a text message from a friend from school. She actually graduated from AST last year, and then she moved home to Ontario, where her family is from. And I had been thinking of this friend earlier this week because this past Wednesday was the 1-year anniversary of when I preached here at Grace for the first time. And this friend had come to church that Sunday to hear my sermon, and she reminded me of that anniversary on Facebook with a little message this week. But the message I got from her yesterday was decidedly less celebratory. She texted me to let me know that early yesterday morning, her dad had died. And it wasn't a surprise. He had been diagnosed with a late-stage form of cancer back in the summer, so they knew that his time was short. But this friend is 25 years old, and that's a young age at which to lose your dad. And quite tragically for her and for her family, the grief of her dad's illness and now his death is compounded because less than a year ago, it'll be a year in a couple of weeks, less than a year ago we were at school one Monday morning when this same friend got a call from home with the news that her sister had gone to bed the night before and couldn't be woken in the morning. She was young and healthy, but her heart failed as she slept and she died. And it was pure shock. So it has been a rough year, to say the least, a very rough year for this friend of mine. The gospel reading that we heard this morning from Matthew begins with Jesus going off into the wilderness. And the scripture actually says he was led off into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And then the scripture tells us that Jesus was there in the wilderness for 40 days, which in biblical tradition doesn't actually mean 40 days. 40 is a number they use in the Bible to mean a long time. So Jesus stayed alone in the desert for 40 days. He fasted the whole time, and he resisted the very appealing temptations of the devil no less than 3 times. And often when we hear people talk about or preach about this story in the Bible, we hear about Jesus' perfect obedience and discipline, and what a fine example he sets for us in his unwavering devotion to God. And fair enough. But are we to ignore the obvious implications of that kind of experience that Jesus had in the wilderness? Jesus was a human being. Many of us believe Jesus also was divine, but still human. So 40 days alone in the wilderness without any food. Can you imagine the effects on the body and the mind during that kind of experience? It would be hideous. I don't care how deep your faith is, there are going to be moments, I will venture a bet, more moments than not, when that is just going to be the most miserable, soul-sucking, lonely, depressing experience imaginable. 40 days alone in a wilderness without any food. I bet there are whole days when you don't even have a single moment's relief from thinking about how hungry you are, how much your body aches, how miserable you feel, your body, mind, and spirit, all of them. Jesus' wilderness experience was not just about his ultimate faith, it's also about his suffering. It's about the loneliness he must have felt. It's about the aching. It's about the sorrow that can start to settle in and feel so acute when the sometimes harsh circumstances of life just pile up in a way that threatens to kind of tip that balance from being manageable hardship toward misery. That's the wilderness experience, the teetering. The day-to-day pushing through, pushing forward, holding on to a thread of hope with all your being, even as the darkness crushes in on you. That's a hard place to be. And that place, the wilderness, unless you are very young, you have been there. Everybody's been there. Every one of us can think right now of a time when we were in a dark, dark place. Some of us, inevitably, some of us are in that place right now. Or maybe we have a family member or a friend who is in that place. Everybody's experienced it, because we can find ourselves there out of so many areas in our lives. Lots of us will find ourselves in that wilderness after the death of a loved one, like my friend that I told you about. I'm sure many of you have been there. We can be left there by broken relationships, breakups, divorce, ongoing family rifts. You can get there by bullying. That's common for teenagers, but it happens to adults as well. We can be led there by poor health, absolutely. Your poor health or the poor health of someone you love. And I know for sure that we can go there in times of financial struggle. The mental health experts are telling us that that's an epidemic. Some of you know that I spent about a decade of my life before I landed here as a car salesperson. And I think I'll never forget one afternoon when a client came in who was also a friend, and she sat down in my office and she put her car keys on the desk and she pushed them toward me and she said, "I've brought my car here for voluntary repossession." And I knew things were probably a little rough for her. She had gone off work on sick leave about 2 years before, and then she lost her job, and then her husband got laid off. So I knew things were probably tight. And I said, no, that's not necessary. You don't have to turn in your car. My gosh, there are so many options. We can look at delaying a payment. We can look at refinancing this loan. And I was even thinking, it's a couple $100. It's a friend, I'll give her the money. But she looked at me and she sat there, and her jaw was just quivering. And she was trying so hard not to cry in my office. And she said, "I have never missed a payment on anything in my life. I've never even had a late payment. My credit, as of today, is perfect. But tomorrow," she said, "I am going to default on my mortgage payment, and on my car payment, and on my student loan, and on my line of credit, and on my credit cards." She said, "I've been doing everything I can just to stay afloat, just praying we could keep it going until we got new work and could turn things around, but I have run out of moves." She said, "I've got $60 in my pocket to feed my kids this week. But tomorrow, when the new month starts, and all of those people try to take their payments out of my account, my whole life is going to come crashing down around me." That is a wilderness place. We mark this season of Lent, many of us, by giving up something. One of my friends at school, she's given up chocolate. I heard someone in the grocery store the other day saying she was giving up gossiping. People will give up all kinds of things as a way of observing this season, intending to imitate Jesus' time of fasting in the wilderness and the subsequent temptation he resists, which we heard about in the scripture. And I don't want to diminish the importance of resisting temptation, because it's an important theme in our Christian tradition. It's present right from the beginning in Genesis when Eve is tempted to eat the forbidden fruit, which we also heard about this morning in the scripture reading. But I do want to challenge this idea that Lent is about giving up something. And I want to do that because when I read this story about Jesus' time in the wilderness, and the temptation that follows, what screams to me as most important is not that he fasted, it's not that he gave up eating for 40 days, it's that he was stuck alone in the wilderness without food for 40 days, lonely and suffering, and yet he did not give up. He endured. He maintained hope. He maintained faith. And even when he was tempted with food and with riches that might temporarily end his suffering, but do nothing to heal him in the long run, he endured. The Lenten journey, I think, is not about what we give up. It's about the deep hope, the deep faith, the deep knowing that our Christian faith promises, that even the longest, toughest, most painful wilderness journeys we travel will eventually lead us to an Easter. I have one more story for you. I popped by a friend's house last night to drop something off, and as I arrived, she and her son were on their way out. So I asked where they were headed, and she said they were on their way to Bubba Ray's in Clayton Park, which is near where we live. This friend, she is a single mom, and she makes a living running her own small business. She has 3 kids, the oldest of which was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at 10 months old. And that daughter has spent the past year and a half either in or living a maximum of 10 minutes away from St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. She is 29 years old, and the set of lungs she was born with are now pretty much kaput. So she's on a waiting list, hoping for a double lung transplant. Her mom, my friend, was on her way out to Bubba Ray's last night because apart from working full-time to support her family and taking care of her other 2 children and worrying constantly about her very sick daughter a couple of provinces away, she is trying to raise $50,000 to cover her daughter's living expenses while she has to be in Toronto awaiting her transplant. Single mom of 3, with a 29-year-old terminally ill daughter on a waiting list for a double lung transplant, sitting in a sports bar on a Saturday night, selling $5 tickets on a signed Sidney Crosby hockey jersey in an effort to raise $50,000 to literally save her child's life. That is finding yourself in a wilderness place and refusing to give up. And one last thought. If you are lucky enough to find yourself strolling through a meadow, metaphorically, right now, far away from the wilderness that is Lent, that is awesome. God bless you. That is awesome. We all have those experiences, thank goodness, more likely than not. But can I encourage you, if you are that person this Lent, make an effort to meet someone else on their journey. Go be an oasis. May it be so.